G'day, and thanks for stopping by at the E-Cave today. In this episode, I'm trying to close out all the issues with these three PS2 Model 30 286 machines, so we can do something else going forward. Now, there is some good news, so if you're interested in that, why not stay? Thanks for staying. Now, in this episode, as I mentioned, I'm hoping will be the last one on these three PS2 3286 machines. They're all working now. Yes, even the PS1, or the first machine that I left for dead some time ago, and in episode 26 managed to sort of bring a bit to life, but it was still hanging and freezing on with memory errors, plus the diskette drive was dead, completely dead. So I'll show you what happened to that. Also, in the last episode, I was working on this one, which is the third PS2 Model 30 machine. It's the one with the Gen 1 286 motherboard. These two have the Gen 2 motherboard. And that one is working perfectly well with the original hard drive, like I showed you. Now, before I show you a bit outside of it, after cleaning it, I'll talk a bit about the fact that I didn't notice it, but one of these machines had a missing diskette button, you know, the blue one you push in to get the diskette drive out. Well, I found a solution for that. You can probably see it sticking out here a bit blue, and I'll show you a bit better. I simply took out one of the others, I measured it up with some calipers, and I used Tinkercad to draw it up or create a 3D model of it. And then I've used my Bambu Labs A1 printer to print it. What I did in Bambu Labs was I put the 1.44 text on the front of the button, but I made it recessed, i.e. negative, and then I used a bit of white acrylic paint with a very fine needle to put some paint into the recess, and I think it came out good. Let me show you. And here's the machine with the missing diskette drive button, and as you can see, it's not half bad. It's a bit bluer than the other one, but it came out very well. Actually, it screams at you it's a 1.44 megabyte diskette drive, so as long as it does that, then I'm happy. Works well. Now I'll show you the outside of this machine, and the cover, there is some damage on the cover, but I'm not going to bother painting it. But it looks good. It's functional with the original hard drive, which I can't complain about, and the noise level of the hard drive is fairly low, so it's pretty good. So here we have the PS2 Model 30 286. This is the Gen 1 machine with the Generation 1 286 motherboard I was tinkering with in the last episode. So that has come up okay. There are some scratches on the cover, but apart from that, I think it's fine. It's functional and works well, and the diskette drive is working. I'll tell you a bit more about that. And this side, not too bad either. Now, one of the things that machine had wrong with it was the diskette drive. If you remember in early episodes, there's a piece of plastic in there that holds the sled when it's actually latching the diskette inside, and it had a broken piece. Now, I had tried to use super glue, and it took 10 seconds to break again. I then, as I said the last time, glued it with JBW weld. And I hadn't had a chance to test it out until some days ago. And guess what? It broke as well. As it turns out, there's a lot of force applied on that plastic piece, and you can see how it broke. And it needs reinforcement. So I resorted to an old trick using a steel pin, which is usually very strong. And I lined up the two plastic pieces, and I then basically put the steel pin on top in the middle and used my soldering iron to heat it up until it melted itself into the center of the plastic. And then I just used the soldering iron to sort of fuse the plastic together at the break, both on top and at the bottom. I then sort of tidied it up a bit so it didn't have rough edges, put a fair bit of plastic grease on it to make sure things would slide smoothly. And I put it in the drive, and guess what? It's been working flawlessly ever since. And I probably popped the diskette in and out probably about 30 times now in my testing, various testing. So I can't complain about that. Last but not least, the PS1 machine is fully functional. As I mentioned in episode 26, I ordered a second-hand planer or motherboard. I actually got it fairly cheap compared to what they go for because the plastic clips on the power supply are broken, but that doesn't prevent anything from working on it. However, that board works fine, but I ended up actually fixing the PS1 machine, both the memory errors and the diskette drive. So let me tell you a bit about that. As you could see in episode 26, after replacing the crystal and fixing the memory model issue, the motherboard began booting all the time when powered on. It always produced the diskette drive error 601 plus the other errors indicating a need to run the setup program. Now on top of that, it would frequently hang with 110 errors, which are parity errors, or simply hang when trying to load the DOS program from the XT IDE Compact Flash card. As I mentioned at the time, with the memory errors and the non-functional diskette drive, I decided to put it aside and get a new second-hand planer. However, I didn't give up. As you could see in episode 26, the SIM modules I'm using at the time are the two I had modified from being a standard SIM to match the IBM proprietary parity interface. So I decided to replace them with known good original IBM SIMs from one of the other machines. Lo and behold, all my memory errors and freezes simply disappeared. The board booted perfectly every time into the compact flash card, but there was no sign of life on the diskette drive. This meant that I couldn't run the setup program to get rid of those configuration errors. I also soon found out that when the board boots, you're supposed to send a drive select signal to the diskette drive and then issue a step signal to drive the head to track 0. And with the oscilloscope, I could confirm that it wasn't doing that, as you can see here. Here are the three lines I'm probing. The yellow and blue line are on the diskette interface and come out of the IBM CMOS ASIC chip, whereas the purple line comes out of the 765 floppy controller, which then goes into the IBM ASIC and comes out as pin 20 on the diskette interface. You can see that here on the schematic diagram. Now when I power up the board, you can see the blue one and the yellow one jump high because these are active low signals, whereas the purple one from the 765 doesn't jump up, it's active high. So let's see what happens. So when we power on, the blue and yellow line go high, as they should on the diskette interface because they're active low, and the purple line stays low because it's active high. But sadly, there's absolutely no pulses and no activity, and you can see on the diskette drive the light doesn't come on because there's no drive select signal and no stepper signal. Given the stepper signal is not coming from the controller, i.e. the 765, into the ASIC, I think it's bad, so that needs to be replaced. I'll show you first what the signal should look like on a good motherboard. So here I'm only probing the step signal, purple one on the floppy controller into the ASIC and the yellow one on the diskette interface. And we should see opposing pulses because the purple one should go high and the yellow one should go low. And you'll also see the diskette drive light come on. So that's what it should look like. Removing the floppy controller chip proved to be a bit difficult. I had to cut some of the pins so I didn't destroy traces. The hardest one was the pin furthest to the right on the bottom. It goes into a ground plane and it was just a nightmare trying to clean that up. I had to apply some heat and I sweated the math coprocessor socket, but it works fine. It just looks a bit ugly. So in the new floppy controller went and I set up the probe so I could probe it again, and let's see what now happens. Bear in mind this is the second time I'm booting the PC after the floppy controller replacement because I managed to clear all the configuration errors up on boot the first time, so you'll see it now booting for the second time. Power on after replacing the floppy controller socketed. Probes as before. Let's hope for the best. And it runs like a charm. And finally that board is now a champion, works all the time, reads and writes diskettes, and is perfect. Finally it's fixed and now I have a spare motherboard. Well, that's all for now. I'm quite happy this is all working. I can now put them away and start doing something else. But I'm still working on another episode on the diskette drive interface. I'm not the person to just do things blindly, so I've been investigating the interface and how the BIOS interacts with the diskette drive. For instance, I wanted to know how does the BIOS determine First of all, there is a diskette drive attached to the machine. How does it determine whether it's a 720K drive or a 740K drive? So what indicators are there in the BIOS to tell you that? So I've been digging into that, and as you've probably seen in the previous video, I actually created a breakout diskette drive cable adapter. Yes, I 3D printed that green thing to get those breakouts settled into it, to make it a lot easier to put an oscilloscope or a logic analyzer on the interface. But I'll talk a bit more about that in another episode once I've uncovered some of the issues around that. The objective, of course, I wanted to understand how I can run a more modern 3.5-inch diskette drive and what pins I have to modify and why I have to do that. I know for the PS2 Model 30 286 machines, they talk about grounding pin 4 because it's not connected on modern drive, but why do you need to do that? So when I finalize that episode, I'll share that with you. So until then, thanks very much for joining me in the E-Cave. And until next time, have a great day.